computer is recording. I'm closing the door. Let me know if anything is required.
All right, thank you. Cool. New person, new tech issues to deal with. So, I'm going to start this whole thing off with a story, and you stop me if you've heard it before. Don't actually stop me. Please keep watching. Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor. You're watching The Bookcase, and when I was in 4th grade, I had a 12th grade reading level. Yeah, I was that kid, the one who'd bring a flashlight with me under the covers to keep reading past my bedtime, the one who would take books out onto the playground with me, who'd read ahead in the language arts textbook, that kind of thing. Fun fact, actually, once when I was in 6th grade, I was so enraptured by an excerpt on my standardized reading test that later I went and I looked that up at the library and found the whole book and read the whole book on my own. The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle by Avi. Very good. I highly recommend. But yeah, I was the girl whose entire personality was reading, who had more favorite characters than I did real friends, and who could go through 600-700 pages in just a few days. I think we all either have been a kid like that or we know a kid like that. I was the reading kid. Until I wasn't. I went off to college, and all of a sudden it seemed I hardly had time or care to read anymore. I did pack some of my favorite books with me into my first dorm room, but to my memory, I never actually read any of them while I was there. The reading that I did do was for my assignments, and while reading for fun is like being transported into a magical world full of wonder and discovery, reading for an assignment is like an unpleasant metaphor. Does this sound familiar yet? Odds are it does, because the internet is full of accounts just like mine, formerly voracious readers lamenting the fact that in their adult life they can barely manage to pick one book up, let alone tear through multiple in a single week the way they used to. And lament isn't just a casual choice of word. A lot of the times when I see these posts, they are truly mourning something, mourning the loss of something that brought them a lot of joy when they were younger, but now seems impossible to pick back up again. For a lot of kids, reading was their whole identity, and then they grow up and that part of themselves is just seemingly gone. So what happened to it? What happened to us? What happened to me? I don't know if I can answer that for certain, but I can try. It's something that I've been thinking of a lot, and it's why I wanted to make my first video about this topic, to try and maybe answer some of those unspoken questions about what's going on inside our heads and inside our lives, and open up a conversation about it. One thing that I realized when I was pondering how exactly I got to this point was that when I was younger, books were a lot more readily available to me than they are now. And I know that sounds silly since I'm standing here in front of a full bookshelf, but bear with me. Specifically, when I was in grade school, I had near constant access to my public school's library. In younger grades, we had scheduled time to go to the library as a class together, and then in middle school and high school, my school library was directly next to the cafeteria. So, as the book kid, you can bet I was in there every day after I finished eating, talking to the librarian, picking out a new book, or just reading. I think I remember at one point even being part of a book club that my friends and I started during lunch, where ostensibly we would meet in the library over lunch to talk about what books we'd been reading that week or month or however often we met, but I don't think we ever had like a specific book that we read together or even spent much of our time talking about books. It was kind of just an excuse to get the administration to let us eat in the nice quiet library instead of the rest of the cafeteria with all of the hideous normal people. Oh gosh, I'm thinking about that. We never talked about books. We just sat there. Still, I had access to a library. The town library also happened to be right across the street from the school, and my mom would take us on trips to the much larger and more varied county library a couple of towns over. I was fortunate in this way to have access to really good public libraries and to have parents who really saw the value of reading and instilled that value in us. But while my high school library was mostly a place of leisure, my college library was a place of homework, research papers, and extensive amounts of coffee. Not only did the amount of free time that I had in college compared to high school diminish, but also the access that I had to the types of books I like to read in my free time diminished as well. But like I said, I did bring some of my own books with me to college. It's not like I had zero access. And the amount of free time that I had diminished, but it didn't disappear entirely. So what was stopping me from reading the books that I did have access to? Well, as much as I don't want to sound like a technology is ruining everything, it's everything wrong with kids these days, you whippersnappers, get off my lawn! I got my first smartphone my freshman year of college. Now I swear I'm not blaming all of my problems on smart technology. It's not like I didn't have the internet when I was in high school. I'm not that old. I even had my own tablet. It was a Nook HD Plus, and it was a brick, but it was a tablet. So I'm not blaming my problems on technology. But I do think there's something to the fact that around the time my life started to get more and more stressful, technology started getting smaller, it got faster, and there were more things that you could do with it. And the internet itself was changing. It was the true rise of online streaming services. Netflix was in its heyday, and the amount of content that was available on YouTube was growing by the minute. I also started getting more into social media personally at this point in my life. When I was in high school, I pretty much only used Facebook to DM my classmates and to play Bejeweled Blitz. But in college, I started signing up for accounts with new sites that I hadn't used before. I started to get more actively into meme culture, fandom culture. I was finding niches that I previously didn't even know existed. Anything you could possibly want to look at or watch was readily available to you with little to no effort. And it was so much easier to come home at the end of a day of classes, sink into bed, and consume content, especially if I was feeling particularly overwhelmed. And I was overwhelmed a lot in college. I've been overwhelmed a lot since college, too. I wonder why that could be. It might sound silly to some of you, but physically getting a hold of a new book that I haven't read before, mentally preparing myself for a new story, getting a hold of it, sitting down and choosing to have quiet and just read it, that's a lot of steps that can take a lot of energy. Way more energy than popping on a show or playing a video game or scrolling through social media. Energy that I don't always have. And it's not like it's just me that's having this issue. Just Google, "why can't I read anymore?" and you'll come up with dozens of articles and think pieces and Reddit threads discussing the issue. Hey, wait a minute. 2020 saw the world experiencing a mass trauma event, and thousands of people who normally turned to books for comfort found themselves unable to do so simply because they could not concentrate on reading. And while COVID undoubtedly made our collective ability to concentrate worse, I think for those of us who are former gifted kids who are now burnt out, you know, the ones who never had to learn how to concentrate in school because things came easily to us then, and then we enter the real world and things don't come naturally anymore, but we have none of the skills that we need to prepare for it. The thing that so many people experienced for the first time in the pandemic, we experienced right when we left high school. An inability to concentrate because we're overwhelmed. A book, especially a new book that we have not read before, takes intentional effort to sit down and read. And that intentional effort can be really difficult to muster up when you're overwhelmed. But do you know what doesn't take the same amount of mental effort to start reading? Fan fiction. While you can intentionally sit down and read a specific fan fiction, in my experience, that's not how it usually goes. It's certainly not how I got into reading fan fiction in the first place. Like many others, I first discovered fanfiction through social media, and while sites like AO3 and fanfiction.net are not social media sites, they're social media adjacent, let's say. At the very least, they make up a part of the scrolling the internet experience. There I go with that motion again. Is this ubiquitous? Y'all know what I mean when I'm doing this? I may be bored scrolling on social media and flip over to AO3 to start scrolling through the tags instead. Or maybe I'll see someone recommend a specific fic in a Discord channel and it piques my interest. Fanfic is overall easier to access and easier to consume than a quote-unquote real book. And it's not because the stories found within fanfiction itself can't be deep or meaningful or dark or thought-provoking. Fanfiction is not a genre, it is a medium. It is just a medium that does not take the same intentionality that a physical published book takes. As I said before, it is an extension of scrolling on your phone. And while I love reading fan fiction, don't get me wrong, I've met some amazing people, connected with some really talented writers, seen and experienced incredible stories all through that medium. Something about it doesn't scratch that reading itch for me that reading a physical published book used to. I want to be able to read both fan fiction and published works again. I want to go back to the kind of reader I was before. That's part of why when Steven first started throwing around the idea of making YouTube videos about books, I was more than a little enthusiastic. Because if there's one thing I love, it's a project. And if there's one way to get me to do something that I know I want to do, but I'm kind of avoiding starting to do, it's make it a project. If I turn reading into a bigger overarching project, then maybe I can reignite some passion for the hobby that used to mean so much to me. But like I said before, falling out of reading is not a phenomenon that's unique to me. And I don't want the conclusion of this video to just be, so now I'll make YouTube videos about reading books, because A, that's not a very satisfying conclusion, at least in my opinion, and B, it's probably not very helpful to most of you watching, and I do want to, be helpful. Like I said, I wanted this to be a conversation about why we sometimes struggle to read. I also know my brain very well, and I know that if I put all of my eggs into one strategy basket, I am inevitably going to fail, because that is just how my brain works. I need to have multiple strategies. The YouTube channel for me can be one, but in order for me to actually stick with it, I will need others as well. So let's talk about some other strategies that I and you can use to keep reading again. So at the risk of sounding a little bit like a cutesy listicle, here are 5 suggestions that I have that could help you get back into reading again, particularly if the soul-crushing anxieties of this world made you want to stop. AKA, here are 5 things that I have done that have helped me get back into reading, and I'm going to share them with you in case they also help you. Number 1. Start with something you've read before. Rereading a favorite book can be such a wonderful experience. It's an opportunity to return to a world that you used to get lost in and visit with characters who feel like old friends to you. I also find that when I reread a book, it gives me the opportunity to pick up on smaller details that I might have missed the first time around, or appreciate details in a whole new light after you know how the story ends. Earlier this year, for instance, I reread The Hunger Games, and let me tell you, rereading the whole trilogy back to back to back, knowing how it ends, it really makes you appreciate the themes that are set up in the first book even more. It really drives home just the tragedy of everything, of Katniss, of Prim, and just of the themes of the futility of war. And also it hasn't aged at all. Like, this was written in response to the media circus that surrounded the Iraq and Iran war after 9/11. But in 2020, the way our media has not changed. If anything, it's more like this now than it was before. Observing this world as an adult really was such a different experience than exploring it as a teen. When you're a teen, you see yourself as Katniss, but when you're an adult, you see her as what she is, which is this product of this system that literally just gives them no chances, and it's so like what teens at the time experienced and what teens now experience. So point is, if you're trying to pick up reading as a hobby, it might be worth going back to a book that you really enjoy. Returning to a story that reminds you why you love books so much could be just what you need to mentally get yourself back into the place where you're ready to experience even more. We're just gonna move on because that was not planned. Number 2, try a book that's below your current reading level. Sometimes the reason I don't start a new book is, as I mentioned earlier, it feels like a big task to sit down and dedicate my time to something like that, especially when it's so much easier to just scroll through something on my phone instead. So one thing I can do to make reading easier is read an easier book. Hunger Games, for instance, is a book that is, at least in terms of its reading difficulty, aimed at kids, and it only took me 2 days to read all 3 books back to back. But if even that seems too daunting, grab a Magic Treehouse book or an American Girl book or something else from the kids section. Not the teen section, the kids section. Just because something is aimed at a younger audience doesn't mean that there's nothing of value in it. Hunger Games is obviously a very dark story, and it is kind of intended more towards older kids and teens, but you can find new things to learn and appreciate even in a book that was written for an 8-year-old. If you're trying to build the habit of sitting down and physically reading a book every day, it might be easier to build that up by beginning with a book that's easier to read so that what you're establishing is the habit of sitting down and reading. So what if it's a kid's book? You're still reading a book, and isn't that what you wanted? You can work your way up to more challenging books later once you've got the habit down, or if you find that you're enjoying just reading through the entire works of Mary Pope Osborne, then don't stop. No one else can tell you what to read. It's your life. Number 3, don't read alone. If you're serious about forming a new habit or starting a new hobby, then an accountability partner can really help. Maybe join a book club or start one of your own. It doesn't even have to be in person. Discord and Zoom calls make it really easy to meet virtually. This is 2022. You don't have to live in the same town as somebody to discuss a book with them. If you can find even one other person to read a book with you, then not only do you have yourself an accountability buddy, but you have someone to talk to about what you're reading. And sometimes that's part of the fun. For instance, I am a big fan of the Grishaverse novels by Leigh Bardugo, and I initially started reading them because of an online book club. We read Six of Crows in a Discord server, and I fell in love with the story and wanted to read everything else. Steven and I are also planning to, on this channel, read some books together at the same time so that we can discuss them with each other and with you, and that's something I'm really looking forward to. Find yourself a person who makes you excited to read, and then you'll want to read. Number 4. What's number 4? Read something you've always wanted to read. Is there a book that you've always been meaning to get around to but just haven't managed to pick up? This is me telling you, go pick it up, read it, right now. If you don't have it, get it at the library. Most libraries have everything, and if they don't have everything, they can get it from another library. Sometimes if you're afraid of the water, the best thing you can do is jump into the deep end of the pool. Please don't actually jump into the deep end of a pool if you can't swim. I am being allegorical. And sometimes if you're trying to start a hobby, the best way to do that is to jump into it headfirst without looking back. For instance, I recently found out that one of my favorite childhood authors had a book out for adults, and I'd never even heard of it. So I immediately put it on hold at my library, and when I got my hands on it, I read it in 2 days flat. Just like I used to do with his books when I was a kid. If you have something that you're excited to read and you actually start it, you'll be less likely to put it down. And finally, number 5. Now, some of you won't have an issue with this, but some of you will find it really, really hard. So it's those people that I'm speaking to right now. Give yourself permission to give up. Look, I know, okay? I know it's so hard because you're a perfectionist and you feel like you have to finish something and you're not enjoying it, but you feel like you have to because you started it. And if you quit something that you start before you finish, that means you're a quitter. It's okay. Let it go. If you're not enjoying what you're reading and you're forcing yourself to finish it, you're not being a bigger, stronger person. You're just hurting your relationship with reading. Perseverance has its place, but the last thing that I want you to do is associate reading with being frustrated and annoyed and with it just being something really hard. I know some people can read multiple books at once, but that's really hard for me to do. It just doesn't jive with the way that my brain works. Last month, I was reading a book and I didn't really like it very much, and I was struggling to finish it, and a book that I really wanted to read was sitting right there, but I didn't let myself pick it up until I finished the book that I didn't enjoy. And guess what? It wasn't worth it. I did it. I pushed through it. I persevered, and it was 1000% not worth it. Turns out that the book that I was not enjoying had an ending that I did not enjoy. Who would have known? Unsatisfying. I felt nothing for the characters or anything when I finished with it, and I just kind of left the whole situation being like, oh, I'm glad that's over. And that's never what you want to feel when you finish a book. The only thing I felt when I finally closed that cover was, man, if I had just given up on that a week ago, I could have started reading this book that I really wanted to read way sooner. So this is me, once again, giving you and future me permission to put down the book that you're not enjoying. Marie Kondo that out of your life. It does not bring you joy. You do not need it. Send it away. Thank you and goodbye. This is a hobby that's supposed to be fun and not a chore. Go and read something that you'll actually like. If you are struggling to put down a book that you really aren't enjoying, but it's really hard for you to turn off that voice in your head that says you have to finish everything, give yourself a chapter ultimatum. Say, I have to finish this chapter. It can be the chapter you're on, the chapter after that, whatever makes the most sense to you. But say, if by the end of that chapter, it's not any better, and I haven't gotten to a point where I now am invested, put it down. In 2022, I have managed to read 14 books so far. That may sound like a lot, and it is, but it also might sound like not a lot, and it's not, at least not compared to what I was once capable of reading in a single year. I do have that inner voice still that's telling me it wasn't good enough and that I needed to read more. Still, I shouldn't be too hard on myself. It is the first time in years I've managed to read even 5 books. There have been plenty of times over the past several years where I can honestly say I didn't read any. Reigniting my love for reading is definitely going to be a journey, not a destination. If it's a journey that you would like to come along on, then there are YouTube buttons below that you can click. They do YouTube things, and there's also at least one social media account linked in the description, maybe more. At the time of recording, we have one, but we will eventually have more, and maybe they'll be in the description. Go down and check. But my name is Taylor. Thank you for watching The Bookcase. Now go have fun reading something.